Good day, friends. I'm Kerry Dillinger. This is Bible Class Topics. It's another lesson. As a matter of fact, it's lesson 7 in our series, Living Our Christian Life. And today, we want to talk about second mile living. Let's get our Bibles out. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to take a rather lengthy reading beginning in verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And of course, Jesus is speaking here. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Let's continue reading in verse 43. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Keep your Bibles open to that passage. We'll be referring back to it as we continue with our lesson. In the text, Jesus, as was his custom, used those things which his listeners were familiar with, and he used those things to teach great spiritual truths. The presence of the Roman Empire in Palestine was something with which every Jew would be familiar. Roman couriers were authorized to press into service any available person or beast for the transportation of official documents. Still, there were restrictions. They could not compel any citizen to go further than 1 mile. Well, what is Jesus teaching here? He's teaching, do not go 1 mile with bitter and obvious resentment, but go 2 miles with cheerfulness and good grace. The text, as much of the Sermon on the Mount, then, is a lesson on our attitude. We, as Christians, should live with the attitude of the second mile. Let's begin the lesson, then, with a comparison of the first mile to the second mile. We see the first mile is a mile of compulsion. And we define the word compel. According to Vine's Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words, it means to impress into service. We see this in the case of Simon the Cyrene in Matthew 27:32, where he was compelled to carry the cross of Jesus. He was impressed into service. Those Christians, and I put that in quotes, those Christians who only walked the first mile asked the wrong questions. And when they ask these wrong questions, they betray a false concept of service to God. The first mile walkers ask questions such as, why should I do more? How many church services do I actually have to attend? How much money do I have to put into the treasury of the local congregation? How much work do I actually have to do? Really? I have to attend every church service? Those who ask such questions then are trying to see how little they can get by with, and they desire to do the minimum requirement to reach their heavenly home. The second mile, meanwhile, is a mile of grace. It is a display of goodness and kindness. It is accomplished by love for the Lord. In the second mile, we see duty becoming privilege. Willingness overflows the obligation. Those who travel the second mile have an attitude of, what more can I do? Paul, writing to the Corinthian church in chapter 15 of his first letter, verse 58, therefore, my beloved brothers, here's what you need to be. You need to be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is never in vain. Let's talk about some other applications of the second mile attitude that Jesus discusses in the continuing verses here in Matthew chapter 5. Looking back at verses 38 through 39, Jesus says, turn the other cheek. Jesus is speaking of a personal challenge, a challenge to have both an injury and an insult. And regarding a personal challenge, we need to turn the other cheek, rise above a personal affront, and in that we will be following the example of Jesus. Someone who had problems with this in his earlier career was the Apostle Peter. But by the time he got around to writing 1 Peter chapter 2, he was of this opinion. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. Let's move on to verse 40. Let him have your cloak. If he takes your tunic, let him have your cloak, Jesus says. By the law of Moses, the cloak could not be taken from a man. See Exodus 22, verses 26 and 27. So what's the lesson? The lesson is that a Christian never stands upon his rights because he considers others before he considers himself. Paul had much to say about this in his writings. We'll start with Romans 12, verse 10. He said, love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit and serve the Lord. If you missed our last lesson in this series, lesson 6, we had much to say about being fervent in spirit. Turning to Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, Paul says, Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Now we come to Matthew 5:42. Jesus says, give to him who asks. This is the attitude one should have towards the needs of others. And Jesus is obviously speaking of those who are genuinely needy. We understand that. Paul understood that when he wrote to the young preacher Timothy in the first letter, chapter 5, verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith. He's worse than an unbeliever. Each of us has a responsibility to provide for our own people. Paul continues to remind us that if one will not work, he's not to eat, 2 Thessalonians 3:10. and it is not our job to subsidize sin or slothfulness. However, the Christian's attitude must be proper toward those who are genuinely in need. And to do that, each of us must show true faith. Listen to James, the Lord's brother, chapter 2, verse 14 of his letter. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith, but he does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? The Christian's attitude must be proper. He must show true faith. He must love not only in word, but in deed. And of course, we are drawn to 1 John 3, a letter written by the apostle known as the Apostle of Love. Verse 17, but if anyone has this world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. The Christian's attitude must be proper toward those who are genuinely in need, because he, that is the Christian, is to be neither selfish nor revengeful, but instead liberal and generous. Ultimately, Jesus tells us to love our enemies, as we read in Matthew 5:43 through 48. Christians are to love, to be full of goodwill, and exhibit it by showing interest in others, even our enemies. What we learn is anyone can love the loving, but it takes a second-mile attitude to love the unlovable. I want to read you a passage that anyone who's trying to get by with the minimum service to the Lord needs to be familiar with. And that's Luke 17, verses 7 through 10. Will any one of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him when he has come in from the field, "Come at once and recline at the table"? Will he not rather say to him, "Prepare supper for me and dress properly and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward then you will eat and drink"? Does he thank the servant because of what he did? But what he did was commanded. So you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, "We are unworthy servants. We've only done what is our duty." Though it is difficult, because it involves sacrifice, as Christians, we must go the second mile, because it's that mile that will yield the abundant rewards. It's our habit in these lessons to provide you with some discussion questions so that you may continue the study on your own or in a small group. And here are the questions for this lesson. They will also be provided in the description. Number 1, why is compulsion not a good motive for action? Number 2, why is trying to do the minimum one must do to reach heaven a dangerous practice? Number 3, how does abounding in the work of the Lord relate to second-mile living? Number 4, by teaching that one is to turn the other cheek, was Jesus saying that one can never defend himself? We need an explanation for that and some scriptures to back it up. Number 5, why should a Christian never stand upon his rights? And number 6, what do you think it takes to love one's enemies? Thank you for studying with us today. This outline comes from the workbook Oh to Be Like Thee, Volume 1, published by Gene Taylor at www.padfield.com. I'll put a link to that workbook in the description below. Also, in the description below, I will link to some other lessons here on the channel. This is at least the third, if not the fourth time that we've come around to Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 48. We had our lessons on the Sermon on the Mount. I'll put 2 links below for that. And we studied Matthew's Gospel back at the beginning of this channel, I believe in 2018. And I'll put a link to our discussion of Matthew 5, also in the description below. Thank you for studying with me today. Your attendance here is always appreciated. Without you, there would basically be no reason to have this channel. Can you come back and be with us in just a few more days? We hope to publish another video concerning Bible class topics. Until we meet again, may God bless.